course, besides Kenya and Uganda, Rwanda and Tanzania also presented their budgets today. Tanzania plans to hike its spending by about 13%. Meanwhile, Rwanda plans to lift spending by about 21%. Well, we're now joined by Beatrice Ndungu. She is a tax manager at KPMG East Africa for more insight on, of course, what these spending plans entail. Great to have you with us in the studio, Beatrice. And I'd like to start off with the fact that it's certainly not an easy time for governments in the region. It's going to be hard to please everyone in the current economic environment. Growing debt, underperforming revenue, and also geopolitical factors. So give me a sense of what the factors are that finance ministers on the continent are facing right now.
Okay, thank you for that question. And as you have clearly put it, it's a difficult time to be a finance minister in the East Africa region, because there are a lot of things that need to be balanced between government needs money to spend, the money is not available, there is also increasing ballooning debt across the countries, the 4 countries that had their budgets read today, and you'd see a common theme on debt. Debt is a common theme, big issue, and then also against revenues that the revenue authorities across board don't meet. So the minister has to really balance between not enough debt, the need to raise revenue internally, and also public outcry from across all the countries, really, with citizens not wanting the taxes to go up. So the finance ministers have to really a very delicate balance. Then there's also the issue of this being a very political, sensitive issue, and wanting to please the citizens who are also the voters, and still meet the budget that and get the money that the government needs. It's an interesting time.
And certainly that has applied especially to Kenya. In fact, Kenya was one of the most anticipated budget readings, and we know why, because about a year ago there were deadly protests in the country over the budget, over planned tax cuts. What's your take on this current version of Kenya's budget?
Oh, there is a big difference when you look at the budget this year and the budget from last year. When you look at Kenyan and the perception of Kenyans towards the budget, they are more interested on the taxes and what the government is doing to raise the money that they are looking to raise. And in the last year, the government was seeking to raise taxes of up to 311 billion. In this year's budget and the finance bill that was released about 2 months ago, the target now is to raise just 34 billion. When you look even at the conversation from the minister today, there was a big shift from wanting to increase the tax rates, and rather his focus, or the focus that the government seems to be taking, is to enhance compliance, try to widen the tax base. You wouldn't say there is one very aggressive tax rate or something that stands out, as was the case last year. And when you look at whatever the citizens or the Gen Zs were protesting against, really, there were the tax measures that were being introduced. This year you won't hear much of that. The government has shifted into how do they now improve compliance. It's very interesting that in Kenya we have over 18 million businesses, only 6.5 million pay taxes. So that means more than half of the business don't pay taxes, and those who really pay don't pay it at the right level. So that is what the government wants to focus in this coming year. They want to, how does government get more money using the existing laws? It still remains to be seen how they're able to do that, given Kenya is majorly informal, is a very informal economy, with a very small percentage being within the formal bracket which the government is able to really reach. And one of the things that stands out from the bill is this access, that KRA would get access to personal data and trade secrets. And that is something that everyone who speaks about the bill has been speaking about. And of course, there is the issue of, is it constitutional for the KRA to have data? Yeah, do they really need the data that they have? That's, we remain remains to be seen what happens.
I mean, Kenya is a huge discussion, but of course there are also 4 other countries, or rather 3 other countries that released their budget today. And it's interesting, they all chose to increase spending by about 5 billion as a whole. Was there anything notable from these other countries that you noticed?
Yeah, one of the most notable thing, and it's a thematic area across board, is the focus or trying to focus on infrastructure. When you look at the budget released from Rwanda, where there is 20% increase, and most of this will really go to infrastructure projects, and that is something that you'll also see in Tanzania and Uganda, but also the increment is not as high as you would have expected. Really? Tanzania just slightly higher than what was there last year. Uganda also, the country that has the highest increase, the highest bump is Rwanda, and actually that could be the highest bump in the last close to 6-7 years. Yeah.
Now, one thing is, as we talked about, there are questions about how these governments can, implement taxes, but at the same time service their debt repayments, for example. So I'd like to get a sense of how much of an impact we've seen certain things like the cuts in foreign aid and also the turmoil that has been unleashed by Trump's trade war. How much has that impacted these governments' ability to balance their budgets?
Yeah, that is a very important aspect to look at, even when looking at the budget, because East Africa relied heavily on donations from USAID, right, especially within the health care sector, within education, other social amenities. One of the things that you'll notice if you were to speak and give focus to Kenya is that the increase from last year is about 3 billion, not very significant, but then even where USAID has really stopped giving as much money as it was, Kenya has been cautioned by the introduction of the SHIF late last year, which now made a significant impact for the government and really kind of cautioned the healthcare sector. For the other countries, there are still a few gaps, and the governments are going to really see how to what to do about those gaps and up some spending on some of the sectors where they thought they would not spend as much.
And tariffs, I mean, how have these tariffs impacted their budget plans as well?
So the tariffs will definitely have an impact in the economies of the countries. If they become implemented, we are likely to see shifts, especially within the flowers. Most of our flowers will go to the US. There are also the apparel industry. Those are some of the areas that would be affected significantly, and maybe it's time for the governments within East Africa region to start thinking, what do we do if this happens and we lose one of our biggest market? Where do we go? Yeah.
Well, certainly interesting times. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today, Beatrice. That, of course, was Beatrice Ndungu. She's a tax manager from KPMG on East African governments and, of course, their budget presentations today.